"You are a good friend and you are a good man," said Father Leopoldo. "You don't want my blessing, but you will have to accept it all the same. Don't be embarrassed, it's just a habit we have, like sending cards at Christmas." The mayor didn't speak again before they reached Orense. An idea quite strange to him had lodged in his brain. Why is it that the hate of man, even of a man like Franco, dies with his death, and yet love, the love which he had begun to feel for Father Quixote, seemed now to live and grow in spite of the final separation and the final silence? For how long, he wondered with a kind of fear, was it possible for that love of his to continue? And to what end? For the mysteries of resurrection, we give thanks.
Listen for words of faith in the Gospel of Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary of Magdala, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought perfumed oils so that they could anoint Jesus. Very early, just after sunrise, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll back the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked, they found that the huge stone had been rolled away. On entering the tomb, they saw a young person sitting at the right, dressed in a white robe. They were frightened, but the youth reassured them. "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? Now go and tell the disciples and Peter. Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him just as I told you." They made their way out and fled from the tomb, bewildered and trembling. But they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. For sacred stories of transformation, thanks be to God.
May I speak in the name of our transing God of awesome surprises. Amen. Tell all the truth, wrote the poet Emily Dickinson, but tell it slant. For, she said, the truth must dazzle gradually or everyone be blind. And that's pretty much the Gospel of St. Mark's account of resurrection, isn't it? Because whilst other resurrection stories were added later, and Mark's is the first Gospel, and there are verses added in most of our Bible texts that seem to be secondary to the text that we read, the two earliest and arguably the best manuscripts of Mark's Gospel stop abruptly, as we heard at verse 8 of chapter 16, with women fleeing the empty tomb and saying nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's a strange end, isn't it? Furthermore, if you look at it in Greek, the text actually stops in mid-sentence. It's more like saying nothing to anyone, they were afraid for. It's an open invitation. The gospel doesn't close. God is doing something else, and it's handing it on to us. Because how do we describe resurrection? It's astounding and truly difficult to convey straightforwardly. How do we live resurrection? The nature of resurrection is that like the two stories we've heard, it involves strange truths of transformation which require, like so much great art, telling its slant, which rest on profound mystery, infinite mystery that most of us are uncomfortable about from most of the time, and which revolve above all around lived, deep experience. Art, mystery, and experience. I think these three things are at the heart of the strange truths of resurrection we exult in today, as witnessed to by our readings and the key images we have this morning. And above all, in the continuing life of you and I and all who follow Christ. Because that text may have ended, but the gospel continues, and that's the beginning of what we now call the church as a community, and we continue in that way. Firstly, true resurrection, like great art, involves, I say, telling its slant. Because how otherwise do we describe resurrection without descending into cliché, or worse still, propaganda? As my most favourite former bishop famously put it, resurrection is so much more than a conjuring trick with old bones. So we do well, if we're to get to the heart of resurrection and God's life then and still amongst us, to avoid the old quarrels between literalists and rationalists, centred only on Jesus' body or the empty tomb. Because the gospel resurrection stories are not really interested in those particular details as such, other than to picture the power of divine transformation, of which Jesus' resurrection is central and crucial, but only the first fruits. Because the women in Mark's gospel fall into silence at the fearsomeness, that's the fear, or we might say the awesomeness. I often think, when you hear in the Bible it says the fear of God, if you replace it with the awesomeness of God, a bit scary because it's mysterious, but more personally friendly, the awesomeness of the power of God. And it's this awesomeness, power of divine love, that all the Gospels are pointing to with all the different resurrection stories. They turn this love, this power of divine love, turns things upside down and inside out, even death and all that denies life. That is the point of all these different stories. You can work on them and try and fit them all together, but you'll never do it because the stories are out of this experience of divine love and are seeking to express that and point to it rather than tell a neat tale. So understandably, of course, we do question what exactly has happened? What is the nature of the resurrected body? Where has Jesus gone? We ask those questions and people have written a lot and will still argue about them. So the other Gospels, I say, and the verses added to these first manuscripts of Mark's Gospel offer us a variety of stories to help with it. Each, however, points symbolically and metaphorically to deeper meaning. Because the real question for Jesus' first followers, not those sort of surface questions, but the real question for them and for us is how do we respond to this reality that people clearly felt and experienced and have done down the ages? And where will all of this end? Because the gospel is not finished. It's for us to write the next chapter. That question, where will all this end, is that concluding question the mayor has in that passage from Graham Greene's story, Monsignor Quixote, we heard read just now. Because like the women in Mark's Gospel, in that story, the mayor had been so impacted by divine love experienced in the relationship that he had with Father Quixote, that despite the priest's death, his life had been transformed. So, like the women who are impacted by the divine love of Jesus, despite the reality of death, the mayor wondered, note, with a kind of fear, kind of awesomeness, where would this love that he'd experienced take him? What do we do with this love that refuses to die, even when death and all sorts of horrible things hits us? What do we do with it? It's kind of scary, but it's an invitation. Because secondly, true resurrection rests on mystery. Because how do you communicate resurrection without openness and elusiveness, without, as it were, fabric blowing and things being untidy because they're meant to be open? Symbolically, the story of the empty tomb is surely, above all, that it is empty. Like the egg that Penny was talking about earlier, it's empty. Now, you can say that's absence, but it's actually potential. That's the point. It's not fixed. God's love is there to be released. It breaks open the death-dealing ways in which we confine, as human beings, life and meaning, and too easily accept the closure of all the other possibilities there are for our life, for the organisation of our society, for the way we live on this planet. We too easily close this off. We close off the possibilities of God and roll stones against those possibilities. To put it another way, human beings spend so much time trying to kill off the living God where we do not find ways to hide from God. Stick God in a tomb, forget about them, and we can get on with whatever schemes we have in our lives. That seems to be the way that our modern world works. The resurrection affirms, however, that we can try to shut God up in whatever way we like and kill the prophets and all the people who are bearers of divine love. But the God of love, this divine love, will always find a way out. Or as my favourite bishop used to put it, you can't keep a good God down. Monsignor Quixote may not have been the very greatest of Graham Greene's novels, which typically always wrestled with powerful Christian themes of life and death, goodness and evil, corruption and salvation, in very edgy modern contexts. But in a more comedic style, it sought to offer light and hope in the midst of the historic betrayals of religion and politics. So what we have in that story is a pastiche of Miguel de Cervantes' great work, Don Quixote, where we have a flawed priest and a disappointed communist drawn together into an adventure of love. And as we heard in the excerpt earlier, what happens is, and that's what happens with God, isn't it? The movement of love. The results displease both religious authority on the one hand, the bishop, those who try and keep religion neat, and also displeases skeptical rationalists like the professor who likes to keep everything neat on that side. Because both of those sort of quarters are interested only in certainty of different kinds. But the adventure of divine love makes no real sense to religious dogmatism or secularist rationalist dogmatism. Rather, the resurrection is proclaiming life and death are not actually quite as straightforward as you think. Rather, there's always the possibility of divine surprise, or as some of us would say, God is always queering the world. It's not straightforward. Because as Father Leopold says in the novel, we are always faced by an infinite mystery. And that's the heart of the resurrection. So no wonder then, like the women in Mark's Gospel, the mayor in our story was perturbed. And he honestly admitted, I'm rather afraid of mystery. Because let's face it, we all are, by mystery, by uncertainty. We prefer sometimes to keep the stone in front of the empty tomb so that the possibilities as well as the challenges of new life are kept from us. For the resurrection, or you can call it the experience of divine love, even in and beyond death and suffering, transforms us and invites us into fresh adventures of love, which is what the mayor realized, that he could not go back to the old because of the experience he's had. And all of this is because, thirdly, true resurrection revolves around experience, not dogmatic belief or dogmatic unbelief, but experience. Because how do we live resurrection without knowing and honouring our experiences of divine transforming love? This is what the resurrection, it's trying to help us see God is alive, and even in the midst of our death and suffering, bringing new life and love into being, and we can draw on that experience where we have gone through this too. The mayor in Monsignor Quixote puts it well. Why is it, he said to himself, that the hate of a man, even of a man like the great Spanish dictator Franco, dies with his death, but love, the love which he'd begun to feel for Father Quixote, seemed now to live and grow in spite of the final separation? Isn't that what happened to those first disciples? That despite everything, Pilate and all that sort of nonsense, that the experience they had with Jesus could not be denied, and it was being born against among them, however you understand the particular resurrection stories. This is at the very heart of the resurrection for those women and others in the first century and ever since. Because we may be traumatized, even sometimes utterly devastated by death and destruction and suffering, just like the first followers of Jesus. But the love we have shared, the deep down love that we call the love of God, can never be denied and will and is rising again. It will break out again, even in extraordinary ways. So, like the women at the tomb, when we go through the sort of experience that they had, the highs and lows with Jesus and this horrendous death and experience, we may, when God breaks through again, feel overcome by awe, and we might not feel able to do anything or even speak for a while. But yet we have been transformed, and we cannot deny that transformation, and it will go on and change us and our world. So in this, in our own lives and in our own bodies, we are the resurrection. If you want to look for the proof of the resurrection, just look around you. And I know churches are falling to bits, but the lives of Christians and the power of God, not only in Christians, in others, is still alive, because we are the visible signs of resurrection which will break out of every tomb and find new forms of transforming expression. Let me conclude with a powerful example of what I believe is lived resurrection in the transgender community. Because today, as well as being Easter Day, it is also the Transgender Day of Visibility. Woohoo! This for me is a happy connection, for so many trans people, I believe, are living signs of resurrection, whose bodies have been transformed from death dealing to new life. They bear and share joy and the openness of transformation through love, and they invite others to do so. On the front of our liturgy sheet this morning, you'll therefore see an image, beautiful coloured image of life and new life, from an artistic initiative called Project 42. Now, the number 42 relates to what was calculated to be the life expectancy of transgender people in the USA. Think about that for a minute. It means that a lot of us, I'm quite old as a trans person on that basis, don't get through, but also that there's an awful lot of young people in our trans community. The project memorializes those transgender people, typically who are black and female, who are killed every year from violence. So the image you see is from a garment that was beautifully created in honor of one particular victim. For clothing is, of course, of particular significance to many trans people, and they're our identities. But those garments are not just grave clothes. They're not just memorials for those who died, some of whom you might say were crucified for who they were, because those people are not just victims, any more than Jesus was just a victim. For like the grave clothes the women saw at the empty tomb of Jesus, these garments are actually signs of resurrection, because the life and love they honor are raised up again and live again in the lives of trans people. So Project 42 gives strength to the trans community to live the life and joy and transformation that we feel and know, and to go on despite that, and in the strength of the experience that we have shared together. And that, as it were, is a little parallel to this greater story of which we're all together. For if we share true resurrection, we do so like artists telling it slant, like the mayor in Monsignor Quixote, receiving the mystery of love that can never be defeated, and like the first disciples, witnessing to its transforming power in the living out of that great divine adventure. In the name of the transforming one, who was and is to come. Amen.